All right, we're back. We are COMP305 in the fall 2019 semester at Centennial, and we are week 10, part 2 of our broadcast. We just finished talking about a couple of design patterns. One of them was the singleton design pattern. The other one that we did was the object pooling design pattern. One design pattern, object pooling, is for optimization. It reduces memory fragmentation and improves performance. And again, if we look and see what we have a situation where I'm using the same explosions. The explosions take care of themselves. I think one of the cool things about this thing is that we've done a couple things here to improve the game, the pulsing clouds that we got going on. One thing I'd like to do now, and this is going to be the third pattern for today and the final pattern we're going to talk about, is the factory design pattern. Again, going back to our book as a reference, again, what I do is I highly recommend, for you guys to take a look at this one. So the factory pattern is a creational pattern. So that's up here. But unfortunately, what they do for this book is it doesn't really describe it online. So I'd like to look at what the factory pattern is from a C# perspective. So if I say factory design pattern C#, you can see what it kind of does from a high level perspective. I'm just going to zoom in here and we'll look at the UML diagram. So what happens is we have this creator and we use the factory method. Usually it's a create. We use the create keyword. Like for example, explosion factory dot create explosion. And create explosion will return a game object. So why go through this process? Why have a factory create our objects for us and not just instantiate? Well, the great thing about this is you can parameterize the objects you want to instantiate. So for example, let's say I want different kinds of explosions, right? Instead of me instantiating different prefabs and having many different prefabs, I can have one prefab that's potentially linked to different scriptable objects, or maybe they might have different properties that I want, maybe a different color, different size, different amount of different effect, whatever. Maybe I want some of them to spin, some of them not to spin. It's up to you, right? So we're going to kind of do that with our factory. We're going to make it kind of randomized a little bit to show it off. We're also going to see that there might be a call for us to use our singleton design pattern yet again. And the reason for this is because we need to make a reference to the factory somehow. So let's get to it. So again, just like before, I want to think about what I'm going to do. I want to, in my code, right now what's happening is the explosion manager, it says, okay, get an instance, and then somewhere down in here, when we build up our pool, I say, okay, instantiate. Okay, but this instantiates only one type of prefab. So what if, instead of instantiating, I call the factory? I said, hey, it's like I think about the factories like this. Okay, I want to buy a car. If I know the brand is Honda, and I want a different car from the factory. Maybe the car that I want is a Civic. The Civic is going to have a color, black, let's say. And let's say that there's going to be different features that I can have with it. Like example, I want a certain style of interior. I want a certain style of exterior. I want different kind of features, maybe navigation. All those kind of extra features could be something that I want the factory to create for me. And I can parameterize those features by asking for it in the constructor of the create method. So I can say, hey factory, I want you to create an explosion that's red and that's also got some rotation, as an example, right? And the factory will just pump out that explosion. Now the thing is, with the object pool, it'll store that random explosion inside of my object pool, which can be good if that's what you want. Or you could have several different pools inside of my explosion manager. For example, let's say I have different bullets instead of explosions. Maybe I have a bullet that kind of fires in a diagonal pattern. Maybe I have a bullet that fires kind of in a zigzag pattern. Maybe I have a bullet that does more damage than other bullets. Or maybe has a different kind of explosion attached to it, or whatever. I may want to have all those types of bullets separated into different channels, if you will, different pools. So I can, when I need a bullet that is more of zigzaggy, I can call zigzag bullet. That's the one I want. Or maybe I want a bullet that does more, sideways firing or multiple bullets in the front. I can have different kinds of bullets or missiles, bombs of different kinds. I can have different kinds of projectiles. Maybe that's what I would do. I'd have a projectile manager, and the projectile manager would manage all those things in different channels, different pools, right? Still managing, but instead of having only one pool, I can have multiple ones. Okay? Again, the factory would help me build any of the objects that I want by parameterizing the projectile. Because again, think about this: the projectile is going to move very similarly to the other ones, right? I'm still going to have speed. I'm going to do damage. I'm going to, when I leave the screen or hit an object, I need to reset. These are all common things. I don't want each projectile to I want to rehash the same code on different projectiles. I want to reuse my code. And one of the ways we can do this is by parameterizing it. So instead of having different prefabs, I can just point to different meshes and textures. I can do all kinds of stuff to reduce the amount of work that I need to do. For now, let's make a simple example of a factory that does randomized explosions with different colors and rotations. That's what we're going to do. So I call up an explosion, but when I save it, I'm going to save it with a random color. I'm going to linearly interpolate between two colors. We're going to do that again, but randomly. Let's try this out. So the first part comes up when we have to make a script. I'm going to attach it again back to the game controller. Again, this is just for illustration purposes, so I'm not going to make it. So this doesn't have to be this way. You can definitely not attach it to anything at all. But to now, let's just do this. I'm going to say create new C# script, and we're going to call this the explosion factory. By the way, one thing you could also do is create a abstract factory. And the abstract factory is like making a factory of factories. So where you inherit from your abstract factory to create your own factory. You might have some inherited methods that are very similar to the other factories, which makes sense. For now, though, we're going to keep it simple, like I said, and we're going to have this explosion factory. So the explosion factory is going to do a couple of things that the explosion manager has already done. So notice that we get a reference to our explosion or our game controller. But we won't need to do that anymore here, right? We're going to let the factory have a reference to the explosion, but not the manager itself. The manager, all it's going to manage is the actual object itself. It's not going to create the object. The creation portion is going to be done in the factory alone. So let's do a couple things. Let's copy this for now, these two. So private game controller and explosion. Again, we're going to remove them from this place in a second. So here they are. And what I want to do is the same kind of reference structure that I did before. So I'm going to kind of go into my explosion manager, and just like we did in our start method, which is down here, I'm going to grab these two things here because those are the things that I want to do. I want to connect. I want to connect to my game object, my game controller, and my explosion. So this is cool. I also want to, by default, in my game controller, I want to connect my explosion factory to it. So I'm going to take my explosion factory and connect it up there. There we are. Okay, save. So my explosion factory is going to basically create different kinds of explosions. Alright, so how does this work? So I want to instantiate here. I don't need an update function. Let's get rid of it. Alright? And just like we did before, here's my explosion manager. My explosion manager, just to make it so that I know for sure, I'm just going to wipe these two things out, which is going to create some errors for me to take care of. It'll force me to take care of these errors. So I'm just going to remove those. You're going to see some red marks in a second as they come up, because without those, you're going to see some errors come up. Eventually, one day, maybe not. And what I want to do is in my explosion factory, I want to make a public object that returns a game object. Public function returns a game object, and it's going to be called create. We'll call it create random explosion. This one won't take any parameters. However, what it's going to do is it's going to return an explosion. what we need to do is instantiate an object of type explosion. That's what we need to do. But we need to parameterize it a little bit. What I want is a random color and a random rotation. Okay? So the rotation is going to go from 0 rotation to, let's say, a maximum of 5 degrees, something like that. And the color is going to randomly change as well. So we're going to make a color. So we're going to say var random color. And that's going to be equal to a new color. And then it's going to be a random.range the whole way from 0.0f, we'll make it 0.1f, so it's not completely black, to a 1.0f. And that's for each parameter. So color is RGBA, but we'll also keep the transparency to 0.5. Okay, so there's your alpha. This is the random color that I made. So a new random color, it's going to be a random range for each of the values, RGBA. A is going to be 0.5. So that's your random color. And then I want a random rotation. So we're going to say var random rotation. And that's going to be equal to some value random range, a float random range between some number and some number. Right? So random dot range, and again some minimum value to maximum. So either from 0.0f to 5.0f maximum. So I got those two kind of random values. And now what I want to do is I want to instantiate a new object, a new explosion. So again, I'm going to say var new explosion is equal to instantiate explosion. So here's my explosion I'm instantiating. And what I want to say is new explosion. I want to change the color first. And also, we're going to talk about the rotation. So what the rotation is going to do is it's going to rotate it. It's not going to keep it rotating because we don't have such a script on our explosion right now. It's going to just rotate the animation a little bit. So we're going to say our explosion is going to be there. We're going to kind of put it at the 0, 0, 0 mark. So again, an empty vector 3.0. Actually, it could be a vector 2.0. That's fine too. And then our that's the position, and our rotation is going to be some angle around the z-axis. So quaternion. Again, notice that there's some options that we have here. Some random. We can put a random rotation angle in there. So if I did this, it's going to give me an error. So for now, I'm going to put quaternion identity. And then I'm going to color it. So first thing I'm going to color it. I'm going to say that the new explosion dot, again, get component, sprite renderer, material, color is equal to random color, and the new explosion dot rotation, sorry, dot transform dot rotation, right, is equal to the random rotation. So it's going to be slightly rotated. So it's going to make it slightly different than before. Now, notice that random rotation, what it's looking for is a, it's once we put it in there, so you know, transform dot rotation, and then in brackets our random rotation. That's what it wants, right? But what I want to do is rotate. I'll be okay. Rotate that amount. So again, it's random rotation. And it's looking for a vector 2. So where am I going to rotate it around? I'm going to rotate it around the z-axis. Right? So it's going to be a new vector 3, where I'm not going to rotate it around my X and Y, but rather around the X-axis, the Z-axis, which is the random rotation. There we go. So it just rotates it a little bit to make it more interesting so that the effect is going to be slightly different. Alright, and if you really want to, we can make it different sizes, maybe a bigger explosion, a smaller explosion for effect. In that case, I want a random scale, right? And I need to apply the scale to both the x-axis and the y-axis. And guys, the random scale we're talking about is like 0.9 to 1.1. Like, we're not going to make it that much variation, otherwise it'll be too big. So again, let's do that too. So random rotation, let's put random scale, var random scale. It's going to be a scalar too, so we're going to make it a float between random.range between, again, 0.9f and 1.1f. It's not going to be a big range at all. And we're going to say that the new explosion dot transform dot set local scale or scale local scale is going to be equal to a new vector 3 object where we have the local scale be the random scale on both sides, as well as on the z-axis it's just going to be 1 because we're not going to modify the scale on the z-axis. So it can change the scale, the size of the explosion is going to be different. It's going to look different. Also what I want is from a, so we did the color is going to be again half transparent. We don't have to make it half, that's maybe too much. Let's make it, instead of 0.5, let's make it like 0.8. Probably 0.5 is too much, it'll be like half transparent. It won't look good. So yeah, we get that, and then what we want to do is we want to make it active. I want to set it active here. Okay, so, just like we did before, remember what we did here in the Explosion Manager is we set it inactive. But there's no point doing it here in the Explosion Manager when I can just do it when I instantiate it as inactive. Right, so I think that's what I want to do. So again, going back to this, I want to set the new explosion here as set active false, because I can do that. Yeah? And then once I've done that, I want to return the new explosion, whatever that is. Make sense? So this is the factory method, the create random explosion factory method. Again, the way I'm going to work it is explosion factory dot create random explosion. Remember that when I go back to Explosion Manager needs a reference to the factory, right? So one thing I don't want to do is my game controller and my explosion, I don't need these things anymore. So in my Explosion Manager, I'm going to get rid of them, like I said, which should raise some errors now. There's one error that's raised right there. You can see that I'm instantiating a new explosion, but I don't want to do it this way. I want to call the factory. Oh man, how am I going to call the factory? That means I got to make a reference to it. I got to drag and drop it, and that's really messy. It's calling me, it's screaming to me for a singleton again, right? Because I want to make that one use. There's only going to be one factory ever. I'm not going to have multiple factories that are random for my explosion, right? So it makes sense that I create it as a singleton pattern. Which means going back to the factory for a second, let's convert it to singleton now. So again, singleton factory. How does this work? This is review. So step 1, I need to make a private instance member that's static. Private static instance, right, of type explosion factory. So we'll call it instance. Okay? Second, I want to make my constructor private. So private, the constructor of explosion factory. I want to call it, there we go, so it's private constructor. So this is the private constructor. And then I want to make a public static explosion factory that returns of type explosion factory. which we're going to call getInstance. Again, this is convention stuff. If the instance is equal to null, then, like we said before, we're going to have the instance equal to a new explosion factory, and we're going to return that instance. And then finally, if it's not null, we're going to return the instance that already exists. Okay? So this is our static instance. Okay? That is basically taking care of the factory pattern. Now, there's problems with this, which we're going to run into. There are problems with this. One, we're probably going to have to make our explosion object private and static. Let's do that now. Private and static explosion. Because that prefab is going to have to be made that way. And then we can access the create random explosion method that does not have to be static from here. Alright, so how does this roll? So here, back to here. So now we've done our explosion factory. Explosion factory, again, we made it a singleton. We've also made our private static game object explosion up here. But here, we're going to replace this instantiate with our factories. We're going to say something like this. We're going to say that the explosion factory dot get instance dot create random explosion. And what this is going to do is it's going to return an explosion object back into the new explosion. We don't have to do this anymore because it's being done for us. So we can remove that. And then this new explosion is going to be transformed to the parent, like normal. Okay? All the rest remains the same, and no other changes. Are you with me? So all I've done is replace the instantiation here with a get instance create random explosion. And what this does is it creates the object somewhere else. It's a black box for us. We don't know. If you're going to give this to one of your programming friends, and let's say, for example, you're the lead developer, you say, just use create random explosion, or create explosion with this color, or whatever. And then you program create explosion the way you want, and all they do is they use it. Now, this is great in a company where you have standard methods or APIs that you want people to use, and you would document this really well. Okay? Okay, cool. So this is great. So let's see if it works. Well, there's a couple things that are going to prevent us. And again, one thing is, we know that in the game controller we've added this static instance, here we go, of explosion factory. I need to update my game controller, so I'm going to apply all. It's one thing I got to do. And let's see how many errors we get now. We're going to get some errors, and we're going to fix them. So we're going to run it. And again, two things we notice. One thing is, this is really great. I mean, we're getting all the explosions, right? Now, what I'm hoping is when we start the game, when we run into these clouds, we're going to see different explosions of different sizes and different colors that are going to make our game a little bit more interesting than a random, kind of like a standard explosion. Let's try it. Okay, so not really noticeable. Let's try it again. So you see that the random colors are coming through. These are all been pre-allocated to us, but I think the local scale, not really that noticeable. So I think I'm going to go back into the explosion factory and change that local scale to make it more dramatic. Let's make it so that maybe we can make an explosion that's 1.5 times the size, and maybe as small as half the size. Let's see if that really makes a difference. I just want to see that scale being applied. So like we said, like new explosion.transform local scale, this new random scale that we want to do across the X and Y axis, right? And let's see how that works. So really small explosion, a little bit bigger, and much bigger, some variation. So we got some variation in the explosions now, and when we hit, where it's really going to be apparent is when we hit a bunch of them at the same time, like, right? So it makes it more, you know, a little bit more variation. Now we're adding colors. That was just for our factory. But really, what you also want to do is modify things up, right? Here's something that we also can do, right? Like one thing we didn't do in this example is we really didn't modify the audio, right? So sometimes we want to modify the audio just a little bit. So we might have, you know, 2 or 3 little audio tones we want to use. So instead of it playing the same audio, the explosion is going to play a random, kind of a some audio clip, right? Now remember that in my prefab, we want the explosion to take care of itself for the most part. We only have one audio source right now called explosion. So what I could do, and again going back up to the web where I had my explosion that I made here, remember this is what it sounds like? I could pitch it a little bit. So, you know, like maybe just, and I'm talking like a slight pitch, guys. Like, so right now you can see that I have my pitch is right here, and I could increase this just a little bit. So it's right at 0. I can go to like, let's say 0.1, right? Or lower. And if that's not really that great, I don't hear a big difference there, and unfortunately I just don't. So let's get maybe a little bit of a pitch here. Let's try this one. And I want to try this because I think it might be good for, you know, what it might sound like. Not really. Yeah, this is where these programs are a little bit less. I think let's try frequency. Okay, that's better. So that's kind of the frequency is what we're going to change. So we're going to go back to yeah. So we're going to go to a little bit of a higher one, and we're going to save this one as export wave. By the way, bullets are also good like this. You don't want to have the same bullet sound the entire way, like bump, 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 bump. You want to go bump, 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 because it sounds more interesting than, the way we do it. Notice we have explosion. We'll say, we'll just call this explosion 1. And we'll just make it a lower one. So again, this is the frequency. Go down here. Yeah, maybe a little bit lower. And we'll save that one. So I have 3 different ones. Kind of a middle one, a higher one, and a lower one. Great. How do we make this all work? So whenever we play a sound, we want a random explosion sound to play as opposed to the same one. So again, going back to Unity now, we're just importing the different sounds. Let's hear them all in a row so we can hear the differences. I know they're not really exciting, but it sounds like this. So here's the first one. Here's the second one. Here's the third one. Right, dum dum dum. Right. So when you hit different times, you should be able to play random ones. Okay, and you'll hear it when we actually collide a lot more with these 3 different types. Second one's not really quite as extreme as the first 2, or the middle one's not quite as different than the second one, but it's okay. So this is, we got 3 sounds, but we only have 1 attached to the game object. So here's my prefabs, and we have our explosion. And what I want to do now is I want to add a couple more audio sources. So let's say audio source and another audio source. There's 1, 2, 3 audio sources. In the second audio source, I want to put the second clip. So again, going back to audio, let's put the second clip in here. And where it says is play on awake, I don't want to do that. In fact, I don't want to do any of them now. I want to play the one that I select on awake, which means I need a script. A little script. There we go. This audio clip, right, there's 3 of them. And what I want to do is I want to get components audio source of type audio source. So audio source says, and for every audio source, I want to randomly pick one of them. Okay? From 1 to 3, or 0 to 2. So what I need is a script. So I'm going to go back to my scripts, and I'm going to call this explosion controller. So there's a couple different ones. So let's make another one, and we'll do a new C# script called explosion controller. It's my explosion controller, and I want to attach it to my explosion this time around. Again, there's different ways of doing this. You could choose not to do this way, and instead of using an explosion controller, you could do it with your explosion manager or your explosion factory. I'm going to choose to do it this way. So scripts, I want to pull my explosion controller onto my explosion prefab. There it is. Alright, it's of type mono behavior. So this one, what it's going to do, it's going to get a reference to all of the audio sources here, right? So again, I'm going to make it a private reference. I don't care about seeing them. Private. And again, it's going to be audio source. Or it's going to be an audio source. Now again, let's think about this. Do you want it to be an audio source list? An array? What do you think is the best thing for this? We need some kind of container to contain all the audio sources, or at least reference them somehow. What do you recommend? Anybody? Array or even a list is fine. So again, it's a private list of type audio source, which we're going to call audio sources. And then what we want to do is get a reference to, we're going to say audio sources, is equal to GameObject.get components, so multiple of type audio source, right? Now notice it says get components, it says cannot convert type unity audio source array to type system.collections.generic.lists, but you can do one of these if you want to, right? I mean, all we're doing is converting an array to a list. That's what we're doing. And when you do this, the audio sources that we get, the random audio sources, we're going to choose right here and start one audio source to make the active audio source for this object when it's created. So we're going to say that private audio source, we're going to call this active audio source. There we go. And this active audio source is going to be a random one, right? So again, we're going to say that the active audio source is going to be equal to the audio sources list, and we're going to get a random range between, again, 0, right, which is the first number, and now it says, is it inclusive or exclusive? Notice it says between min inclusive and max inclusive. So 0 to 2 would be 0, 1, 2, all right? So 0 to 2, right? Whatever that is going to be, that's going to be the active audio source. Does that make sense? Could have made this, instead of making it a list, let's go back. I could have made this an audio source array. And the audio source array would look like this. It doesn't really matter how you do it. So here's an audio source array, audio sources. You don't have to make it two lists anymore because it is an array, naturally like this, right? And then you do it this way too. Either way is perfectly fine because we're not going to actually do anything else other than do this. Okay? It's not update we need. We never need to do this once. We just need to play the audio source once, and that only happens on start when this thing plays for the first time and only time. So we're going to say that active audio source dot play, and we're just going to play that active audio source. Okay? So that's all it does. I mean, literally you could take this and deposit it somewhere else. It doesn't do anything except play for some random sound. Are you with me? Again, just to make it more interesting is what we're trying to do. Okay, so we got a little controller. Notice it goes on all the prefabs. We don't have to change this anymore because all the prefabs have been updated because I'm working on the prefab itself. Let's see if this works or it fails. We'll see if it fails or works in a second. Alright, cool. So we got that instantiated. Let's see how this works. We're going to just run this. And see a little better, right? And it's slightly different. That's the idea here. It's not something that's going to make you jump out of your seat. Right? Okay. Factories. They're pretty simple. And the idea behind the factories, so the three we talked about today, that's it for this section. The three we talked about today was singleton, object pooling, and then factory design patterns. Okay, those are the three. Highly recommend you use all these three different ways. Next week I'm gonna give you guys a little exercise that has to do with those things. We're also going to be talking about a little bit of AI next week for the first time. We kind of did this away. We've been working with this particular project because it's an easy project to work with, right? In terms of MailPilot and moving things around and so on. We've also talked last week about scriptable objects, but next week we're going to get to this. We're going to go back to the platformer for a second. And the platformer that we're going to use, we're going to make it so that the little enemy that runs around the screen is going to have different states, right? When he sees the player, he's going to run faster to get to the player. And maybe he's going to fire a bullet or something like that, right? When he takes damage, we'll give the enemy a little bit of a scriptable object with some damage, right? Maybe we'll even color the enemy slightly different. Some of these scarecrows will be slightly greener than others, maybe slightly blacker than others, maybe slightly bigger than the other ones, and the bigger ones will have more health, the smaller ones will have less health, maybe scarecrows, whatever we're going to see. And we're going to do the same patterns we did today, plus we're going to add a couple more. For example, when we kill a scarecrow, we should use the observer pattern, which is something that I want to talk about next week, that gives us an achievement. Hey, you killed the scarecrow for the first time, kind of thing. So there's a lot of little things we can do next week, but one of them is I wanted to start doing AI, very simple AI, which is it's going to use line of sight to run away. Okay, this is the plan for next week. And it's going to use some simple AI to attack, run away, patrol. Those three states, very simple. One other thing I want to talk about is next week is week 11. Then we have week 12. The week after next, we're going to do a play test. So I need you guys to have your 3 levels properly working by next week. Obviously tonight and tomorrow you're going to have your beta done. But what we're going to do is we're going to swap games on week 12, right? And get everyone to try everyone else's game, okay? And then what we're going to do is get feedback from everyone else's game, in your game, and maybe make some adjustments, make some tweaking. So by week 13, when your final build is due, and that means your final build, there's no more development after week 13, right? You're going to hand in your final build. On week 13, we're going to be talking about pitch presentation that we're going to be doing on week 14. Week 14 is going to be your final presentation. It takes the place of your final exam in this course, so you must attend. Unless there's some kind of catastrophe, if you missed your final presentation, you will get 0 for your final presentation, just like as if you missed an exam. Okay, so please make sure you plan to attend, make arrangements, proper arrangements with whatever you have to do to come into that one. Only one person need present. Okay, so it doesn't mean that everyone has to present. It's just that your group is presenting, and I want everyone there. You will be marked on attendance as well as on participation. So if you don't say anything through the entire time, you will lose marks, right? I'll make sure that everyone has a chance to say stuff. I will watch you guys. Also today, like I talked about, because your beta is due tomorrow, there's also a part that is your peer review. I know some of you have been doing it, some of you haven't. It's worth 1% of your final grade. Please ensure that you guys all do it, right? Give feedback to everybody else. Again, it will affect everyone's performance slightly, right? I mean, it doesn't have a great weight, but it will affect people's performance over time. So please do that. And then at the end of the day, we're going to have a great little project that I'm hoping for by week 14. You'll be able to show off your project. I'm also going to get you to do a couple things. One, make a little video. So one thing you're going to do is record a little video that you're going to put, it's going to be unlisted for now, up on YouTube, where you kind of go through your presentation. You're going to actually step through it one time on your own before you see me, right? And we're going to talk about that on week 13, how to do that, how to put up a video, how to do all that stuff, and why. And then what you can do is later on, if you ever want to show that video off in an interview or something, you can say, hey, look, here's my demo video for this game we made. It'll talk about how we made it and the pitch, all that kind of stuff that you can show to your interview. And it's great practice for when you do a really cool pitch, let's say, for example, at a game jam or someplace else. Okay? Questions around the next following weeks that are coming up. Lots of stuff to do, guys. Please plan to attend those the next few weeks. Again, I know, here's what I know as a professor. I know there are competing assignments. I know Java's pretty hard on you guys right now, that I've been hearing. I know that you're going to get exams that are coming up in week 14. You're going to have study war. So that's going to take away from some of this work. But please plan to attend, the final day. It'll be the final day of classes for you. It's probably, unless you have courses on Sundays, probably the final day of the semester that we get together. All right? So any questions around the next few days? All right, guys. Thank you so much for attending today. That's it for me today. I'm going to let you guys go early so you can work on your beta, right? That's due tomorrow at midnight.